Have you ever had a moment where you finally stood up and the whole room went quiet? Not because they admired you, but because they didn't expect someone like you to speak. Emily Reeves was just a small-town waitress, juggling double shifts and a fading hope that life could still change. Then one day, in a crowded diner, she refused to be humiliated by a powerful millionaire who thought money could buy silence. She spoke her truth raw, unfiltered, and walked away thinking it was over. But the next morning, a mysterious black card arrived with her name on it. What would you do if the person who once belittled you suddenly offered you everything you'd ever struggled for? Would you take the hand or walk away? This is a story about dignity, grief, power, and quiet strength, and the cost of choosing yourself when the world expects you to stay small. Settle in. Let's begin. If this already stirred something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps stories like Emily's reach the hearts that need them most. The morning light in Fallow Creek always had a way of creeping in gently, like it didn't want to wake the town too abruptly. At the Red Oak Diner, it filtered through the dusty front windows and long, slanted beams that made the scuffed linoleum floors look warmer than they really were. It was a quiet kind of place, the kind where regulars had their usual, and the jukebox hadn't played anything newer than 1992. Most mornings started the same, and that was how Emily Reeves liked it. At 36, routines were her safety net. She pulled into the diner's gravel lot just after 6:15 a.m., the familiar rattle of her old Chevy echoing like clockwork. She wore her hair in a neat bun, her uniform clean but faded at the collar, and her sneakers held together more by habit than stitching. Inside, the coffee was already brewing. The scent hit her first bitter and comforting. She greeted Marla, the cook, with a quiet morning and tied on her apron. Her hands moved instinctively, refilling sugar jars, setting out silverware, checking creamers. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Between table 3 and the counter, she paused to glance at her phone. A missed call from the nursing home. Her chest tightened. Her mother, Mary Reeves, had wandered again during the night. Emily would call back later. Right now, the coffee needed pouring, and the regulars would be walking in any moment. By 7:00, the diner was half full. Joe Hensley, retired mechanic, was talking politics over black coffee with Maggie, the town librarian. The radio played something soft from the 70s. Emily moved with calm efficiency, her smile tired but warm. She'd learned long ago that kindness didn't cost anything, but it could hold people together. Then, just past 7:15, the door opened with a sharp chime. He walked in like he owned not just the diner, but the pavement outside. 2, tall, dark navy suit, Italian leather shoes, Thomas Granger. Emily didn't know his name then, but she knew the type. Too polished, too perfect, and not the kind of man who usually wandered into a small-town diner on a Monday morning. He looked around like he'd just stepped into a relic. She approached with her usual courtesy. "Morning, sir. You can take any open booth. Want some coffee to start?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked her over not with interest, but calculation. "I'll sit there," he said, motioning vaguely toward the corner booth. "And yes, coffee. As hot as possible. I hate being disappointed first thing in the morning." There was no please, no smile, no hint of appreciation. Emily brought the pot to him, poured silently, and placed a menu in front of him. "Let me know when you're ready." She turned to walk away. "Actually," he called after her, "I'll have 2 eggs scrambled, bacon, toast, and don't mess up the eggs." She blinked. "We'll do our best." "You'd better," he said, not looking up. First impressions matter. That was the first crack in the air. Emily kept moving, keeping her smile in place. She'd handled rude customers before, but something about this man made the air feel heavier. 10 minutes later, the eggs arrived. He sent them back. Too dry. Second try. This time, too wet. Then he commented on the toast, then the bacon, then the booth's uncomfortable seating, and then loud enough for the nearby tables to hear he said, Places like this are why America's service economy is collapsing. Every fork in the room froze. Emily stood at the counter, her knuckles white on the edge of the register. Her chest was tight, her vision blurred for half a second. Don't say anything, she told herself. But then, she saw Joe's head drop. Maggie shook hers sadly, and for the first time, she felt the shame wasn't just hers, it was shared, like this man had insulted the whole town. She walked over, calm, slow, but there was something different in her eyes. "Sir," she said gently, "you've been here less than 20 minutes. You've insulted the food, the furniture, and the people who work here. If this place disappoints you so much, maybe it's not the right place for your breakfast." He looked up, surprised. "Excuse me," he asked, voice cold. "I'm saying," Emily said evenly, "we try our best here, every single day, and maybe that's not good enough for someone like you. But if you think shouting and belittling people gets you better service, you might want to try another zip code." There was a beat of silence. Then he laughed short, clipped, incredulous. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "No," she said, "and I don't think it matters." Across the room, someone dropped their fork. Someone else whispered, "Damn." Thomas Granger stood, reached into his coat, and threw two $50 bills on the table. "This," he said, "is more than you'll make all day. Take it. You'll need it." Emily didn't flinch. He walked out, leaving the door to swing shut hard behind him. Silence wrapped the diner for a long moment. Then, slowly, the clatter of forks returned. The jukebox picked up again, playing something faint and distant. Emily stood there, hands trembling at her sides. She'd spoken up. She had no idea what it would cost her, but she knew, deep in her gut, something had shifted, and there was no turning back. The diner didn't quite go back to normal after Thomas Granger left. There was no applause, no high fives, no dramatic music like in the movies, just an awkward hush that lingered longer than it should have. Then the room filled again with cautious glances and half-finished sentences. Emily stood by the register, fingers twitching against the countertop. Her heart was still racing, but outwardly, she was steady. That was her way, let the storm pass on the inside. Maggie was the first to speak. "You okay?" Emily nodded once. "I will be." Joe Hensley grunted from his stool. "Damn right you will. About time someone told folks like him off." She offered a grateful smile but said nothing more. Later. In the break room, a converted storage closet with one sagging chair and a flickering light, Emily sat alone, staring at the wall. She should have felt proud, maybe even triumphant. Instead, she felt exposed, like something she had kept buried for years had been pulled up too fast. Was it worth it? She'd made a scene, in front of customers, in front of her manager, who hadn't said a word. She could lose her job. Lord knew there weren't many around here, not with her resume, not with her schedule. And then there was her mom. Mary Reeves had always been sharp quick with a joke, faster with a correction. She'd taught literature at the high school for 30 years. Emily used to sneak into her classroom after school, hiding under the desk and pretending to be a writer while her mom graded essays. Now Mary barely remembered what day it was. Emily got off her shift at 3:00 p.m. sharp and drove across town to the care home, a low beige building behind a shuttered strip mall. Inside, the nurse smiled with that mix of pity and weariness only caregivers mastered. She had a bit of a rough morning, she whispered. Emily nodded, bracing herself. In room 204, Mary was seated near the window, humming a song from long ago off-key but gently. Her thin hands trembled in her lap. "Hey, Mama," Emily said softly, kneeling beside her. Mary looked at her, eyes squinting like trying to read something far away. "You came back. I always come back." Mary nodded, then blinked. "Did you bring your father?" Emily smiled tight, broken at the edges. Not today. They sat together for an hour. Emily brushed her mother's hair, read from an old copy of Little Women, and watched the sunlight shift on the floor. It was quiet here, painfully so. And yet, a different kind of silence clung to Emily tonight. Not the soft, fading kind, but the kind that holds something in its breath. By the time she made it home, a rented duplex with squeaky stairs and a stubborn furnace, it was almost dark. She microwaved leftover soup, scrolled through her phone, deleted 2 missed calls from an unknown number, then finally opened the drawer by the fridge. Inside was a small folder marked Bills. Most were unopened. Water, power, pharmacy, care home balance, past due, past hope. She dropped her head into her hands. This is why people stay quiet, she thought, because dignity doesn't pay the electric bill. But somewhere inside her, buried under the fear and fatigue, there was still a sliver of something. Not pride exactly, more like refusal. Refusal to keep pretending she was invisible. She laid down on the couch, the cushions uneven, her blanket still smelling faintly of the diner's fryer oil. Sleep came in waves. One moment she was floating, the next, falling. At 5:52 the ring of the landline phone, which rarely rang anymore, jolted her awake. She picked it up groggily. Red Oak Diner, she mumbled instinctively. Emily Reeves, a voice asked. She sat upright. Who is this? The voice was calm, clipped, male. My name is Clive Patterson. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Thomas Granger. Her mouth went dry. Why, there's a package for you. It's being delivered to the diner this morning. Mr. Granger asked that you receive it personally. What kind of package? Clive paused. He also asked me to say, he regrets how yesterday unfolded. Emily almost laughed. And he thinks, you might be worth a second conversation. She didn't respond, just hung up. 10 minutes later, she was standing in her kitchen, hands trembling as she made coffee. She spilled the grounds, burned her thumb, cursed softly. This made no sense at all, unless it wasn't a package. It was a trap, some twisted way to embarrass her, or worse, buy her silence. By 6:30, she was walking into the diner, the wind sharp against her cheeks. The regulars were already seated. Marla nodded from the kitchen. The radio was low, same old tune. Then, just as she was hanging up her coat, a courier stepped through the door. Young, uniformed, clipboard in hand. Delivery for Ms. Emily Reeves. She blinked. That's me. He handed over a black envelope. Heavy. No return address. Sealed with wax. The kind of envelope you don't get unless you've either won something or are in deep, deep trouble. The envelope sat on the counter like it didn't belong there. Too smooth, too heavy, too intentional. Emily Reeves stared at it for a long minute before touching it, half expecting it to vanish the moment her fingers brushed the surface. It didn't. It felt cold and strange in her hand, like holding something expensive you had no business touching. She slipped it open with her fingernail, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single black card, matte with gold lettering. No logo, just her name, Emily Reeves. And a smaller note, written in slanted script. Use it as needed. A conversation awaits. Should you wish it. TG. No explanation, no terms, no fine print, just 4 lines that carried more confusion than clarity. The card was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't a gift card or a credit card in any traditional sense. It had weight, like it held secrets, or power, or both. She turned it over in her hands. There were no numbers, just a microchip, and a symbol she didn't recognize, 2 interlocking rings, like an infinity sign turned sideways. A conversation awaits. What kind of conversation? Why her? By 7:45, she was standing behind the counter at the Red Oak Diner, moving mechanically through her shift. Her body was there. Her mind wasn't. When she poured coffee, she overfilled cups. When she took orders, she forgot them. Marla gave her a look from the kitchen that said, "You okay?" Emily just nodded. Truth was, she didn't know what she was feeling. Confused, mostly, suspicious. But also something else, a quiet, persistent tug she hadn't felt in years. Hope? No. She wouldn't let herself go there. Not yet. The gossip started by mid-morning. Joe leaned across the counter. That man who caused the scene yesterday, he really came back or sent someone. Emily sighed. Something like that. Maggie raised an eyebrow. I heard he's got more money than the whole county combined. What's he want with you? That was the question, wasn't it? During her break, Emily sat outside behind the diner, the cold concrete step biting through her uniform. She held the card again. Could she really use it? What if it was loaded with credit, enough to pay for her mom's care, enough to fix the old car? Replace the tooth she'd been ignoring for months. No, she whispered aloud. You don't take money from men like that, not unless you know what it's buying. Still, she didn't throw the card away. She couldn't. That evening, back at home, she placed the black card on the kitchen table, like a guest she wasn't sure she wanted to invite in. She dialed the number that Clive had called from. It rang twice. Clive Patterson speaking. It's Emily Reeves. There was a pause. Miss Reeves, I assume you received the envelope. What is this? She asked flatly. Is this hush money a stunt or some kind of test? Clive's voice didn't flinch. Mr. Granger has asked to meet with you. That is all. No strings, no obligations. Why he finds your perspective valuable. She let out a short laugh. My perspective made him walk out of a diner like he'd stepped in something foul. And yet, Clive replied calmly, he still wants to talk. Emily stared at the ceiling. The plaster above the light fixture was cracked, one corner flaking down like a peeled bandage. She was tired. Tired of working 3 doubles a week just to keep the lights on. Tired of seeing her mother fade in pieces. Tired of being unseen until suddenly. Now, she was seen too much. Fine, she said. I'll meet him. But not at his office. Not at some high-rise palace. I understand. Neutral ground. Public. Quiet. There's a coffee house on Main, just outside Fallow Creek. Clive offered. Cornerstone. Tomorrow at 11. She paused. All right. She ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. Then, without really thinking, she walked to her bedroom closet and reached for a blouse she hadn't worn in 2 years. It was soft blue, with a tiny tear in the seam under the right arm, but it would do. She hung it on the back of the door. Then she stared at herself in the mirror. No makeup, worry lines deeper than she remembered, circles under her eyes. What are you doing? She whispered to her reflection. And for once, she didn't have an answer. That night, Emily sat at her mother's bedside. Mary was more lucid than usual, a rare moment of clarity that slipped in like a breeze. Your hair looks nice, Mary said softly, eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. Emily smiled faintly. Thanks, Mama. You always had such fire in you, Mary murmured, her voice drifting. Don't let the world water it down. Emily pressed her lips together, emotions prickling her throat. She didn't know what tomorrow's meeting would bring. She didn't know what Thomas Granger really wanted. But she knew this much: she would walk in with her head high, and whatever power he thought he had, he wouldn't get it for free. The Cornerstone Coffee House wasn't fancy, but it tried. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and ambition-reclaimed wood tables, local art on the walls, and soft jazz playing from overhead speakers. The kind of place where people held book clubs or interviews they weren't yet sure they deserved. Emily Reeves stepped through the front door at 10:55 a.m., 5 minutes early. She didn't wear makeup, didn't bring a purse, just her soft blue blouse, jeans that weren't frayed yet, and the black card tucked deep into her coat pocket like a piece of contraband. She scanned the room, and there he was, Thomas Granger, seated alone at a table near the window, wearing a charcoal gray coat over a steel blue shirt, no tie, no phone in hand. He wasn't scrolling or texting or pretending to read. Just sitting, as if the whole place were waiting on him, and somehow it was... He looked up. Their eyes met. He stood slowly, politely. Ms. Reeves. Mr. Granger, she replied, her tone neutral. He gestured toward the seat across from him. Please. She hesitated, then sat down. The table between them felt like more than wood. It felt like a challenge. A server approached. Coffee, she asked. Yes, thank you, Emily said. Thomas held up 2 fingers. Make it a pot. The server nodded and disappeared. Thomas leaned forward slightly. I appreciate you coming. I haven't agreed to anything, Emily said. He nodded, as if that were exactly the answer he expected. Of course not. There was a moment of silence, not awkward, just measured. She studied him. He looked tired. Not in the way working people look tired, but like someone who hadn't been told no in a long time and was finally starting to feel the cracks from it. Why me? She asked plainly. His eyes narrowed slightly. Because you told me the truth. That doesn't happen often. I didn't tell you anything you didn't already know. But you said it out loud, he said. In front of people, without fear. Emily raised an eyebrow. Oh, I was afraid. Still am. I've got bills I can't pay and a mother who barely remembers me. You don't get to romanticize what I did. Thomas tilted his head, considering. Fair. The coffee arrived. The server poured them each a cup and left without a word. Thomas took a sip. So did Emily. I want to offer you something, he said carefully. An opportunity. I figured I'm launching a new venture, a restaurant group, multiple cities, multiple levels. But I don't want just another chain. I want something real, grounded, with soul. And you think I have soul? Emily asked, half skeptical. I think you have clarity, he said, and the courage to say what's broken before it costs everything. She exhaled slowly. Let me guess. You want me to consult? Be your working class mascot. Not a mascot. A lens, he corrected. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. You say that like I'm not a person? Thomas paused. There was a flicker in his expression. Not guilt, exactly, but maybe something like recognition. I know what it sounds like, he said, but I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to ask if you'd consider helping shape something from the ground up. I'll pay you fairly. I'll respect your time. You'll be free to walk away at any point. She stared at him. You humiliated me, Mr. Granger, in my place of work, in front of my neighbors. What makes you think I'd want to help you build anything? Thomas folded his hands. Because you didn't just call me out. You exposed a hole in my own thinking. You reminded me of something I forgot. Emily studied him. People don't change in one night, she said. No, they don't. He agreed. But sometimes they remember who they used to be. Outside, the wind stirred leaves along the sidewalk. A woman walked by with a stroller. Somewhere, a truck honked in the distance. Inside, everything was still. Emily took another sip of coffee, then set the cup down. I don't trust you, she said plainly. I wouldn't expect you to, and I'm not saying yes. He nodded, but I'm not saying no yet either. She rose from her seat, pulled a business card from her coat, a cheap one from a copy center in town, and placed it on the table. If this is real, and you're serious, you can send details here. But if it turns into a game, I walk. Thomas met her gaze, understood. As she walked toward the door, she paused just once and looked back. He hadn't moved, just watched her go with that same unreadable look. Back in her car, parked under a maple tree dropping golden leaves, Emily sat for a long minute with her hands on the wheel. She wasn't sure what just happened. She wasn't sure what came next. But something had started, and it felt like more than a job offer. It felt like a reckoning. Emily Reeves didn't sleep much that night. She lay on the couch beneath a thin quilt, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Her little house creaked in the wind, like it was also struggling to hold itself together. The black card sat silently on the kitchen table untouched, but impossible to ignore. In the dimness, her thoughts churned like a storm tide. She had met men like Thomas Granger before, at least in theory, the powerful ones, the ones who never had to ask for forgiveness because they never believed they were wrong. But Thomas was different, or at least trying to be. and that unsettled her more than if he'd stayed a villain. The next morning brought more questions than answers. Emily clocked into the Red Oak Diner, feeling like she was stepping into a life that no longer quite fit. Her name tag hung crooked. Her shoes rubbed against the same blistered spot on her heel. Nothing had changed, but she had. Marla greeted her with a nod. "You okay?" Emily gave a small smile. "I think so." But she wasn't sure. By the time her shift ended, Emily had burned herself twice, dropped a tray of forks, and accidentally gave Joe Hensley the wrong slice of pie. He didn't complain. He just smiled kindly and said, "We all have days like this." She knew she couldn't stay in limbo much longer. She needed answers. That evening, Emily visited her mother. The nursing home was quieter than usual. Mary was seated in her usual chair near the window, humming to herself and tearing the corners from an old magazine. "Hi, Mama," Emily said, kneeling beside her. "You doing okay today?" Mary smiled faintly. "Did I miss something?" "No, just me." They sat together, listening to the rain begin to patter softly against the window. Mary turned toward her suddenly, eyes sharp. "You look worried." Emily hesitated. "I've got a big decision to make." What kind? Emily looked down at her hands. "Someone offered me a way out of all this, but I don't know if it's real or if it'll cost more than it gives." Mary studied her for a long time. "When I married your father," she said slowly, "we had $30 between us. He wanted to go to trade school. I had a teaching certificate and no job. We took a chance anyway." Emily's throat tightened. "And was it worth it?" Mary smiled again, far away. "But warm. Even the hard roads gave me you." Later, at home. Emily sat in silence as the refrigerator hummed in the background. The black card was still on the table. She picked it up, just to feel its weight again. Could she use it? Would that mean she was selling herself out? Would it mean she was being smart or desperate? She thought about her mother's monthly bills, about the long list of medications that insurance didn't cover, about her own cracked molar, the car that stalled when it rained, and the draft that crept in under her bedroom window each night. Then, she thought about the look on Thomas Granger's face when he said, "Sometimes, people remember who they used to be. What if this wasn't about money? What if it was about meaning?" At 10:15 p.m., Emily made a decision. She pulled on her jacket, grabbed her keys, and drove to the only department store in town still open late. The parking lot was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a tired sigh. Inside, she found the coats section. Her mother's jacket, the one she wore daily, had missing buttons and frayed sleeves. She'd sewn patches over the lining twice. Emily ran her fingers along the racks, looking for something warm, soft, simple. Finally, she picked a navy wool coat with deep pockets and a quiet dignity about it. At the register, the cashier looked half asleep. Emily handed over the black card. The machine processed for a moment, then approved, no questions asked. She exhaled slowly, folding the receipt into her pocket. Back at home, she draped the coat over a kitchen chair and stood for a long time, just staring at it, not because it was expensive, but because it felt kind, like a moment of breath in a world too often gasping. She didn't know yet what she would tell Thomas. She didn't know yet if he could be trusted or if she could trust herself to navigate whatever came next, but she knew this much, for the first time in a long time. She had taken a step towards something different, not flashy, not easy, but different. And that, she decided, was enough for tonight. The office didn't look like anything Emily Reeves had ever stepped into. The floors were polished concrete, sleek and echoing. The reception desk curved like a sculpture. On the far wall, floor-to-ceiling windows spilled daylight across leather seating and abstract art. It felt more like a gallery than a place where people worked. Emily stood in the elevator lobby of Granger & Co. Ventures, her coat still damp from the morning rain, hands clutched tightly around her thrifted handbag. She almost didn't recognize herself in the glass reflection hair pinned neatly, blouse ironed, the black card tucked away in her wallet like a pact she hadn't fully agreed to. Emily Reeves, a calm voice said. She turned. It was Clive Patterson, Thomas Granger's assistant, in person. He looked exactly as he sounded on the phone, precise, composed, and slightly unapproachable. A gray suit, wire-frame glasses, and a pen clipped neatly in his breast pocket. "If you'll come with me," he said. They walked in silence down a wide hallway lined with glass-walled offices. Inside, people sat at modern desks, typing rapidly, holding headsets, or flipping through glossy mock-ups of restaurant designs. Emily felt the stares curious, subtle, but very real. She could almost hear their thoughts. She doesn't belong here. Waitress. Small town. Who did she have to impress to land a meeting? Clive opened a door into a modest conference room, though modest still meant walnut-paneled walls and a ceiling-mounted projector. "Mr. Granger will join you shortly," he said. Then, after a beat, added gently, "You're not being evaluated. This is exploratory." She wasn't sure whether that made her feel better or worse. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Emily moved toward the window and looked out at the city. The buildings rose like ambition, fast, unapologetic, cold. A far cry from Fallow Creek, where the tallest structure was a church steeple and everyone still waved from their cars. After 10 minutes, the door opened again. Thomas Granger entered with a small nod. He wasn't in a suit today, just a black sweater, slacks, and a look that suggested he hadn't slept much. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting across from her. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Emily replied. He smiled faintly. "I'm aware." He handed her a folder. Inside were documents, non-disclosures, brief outlines of the project, and a preliminary offer, a 3-month consulting term. He explained, "Short-term, flexible hours. Your role would be observational at first, field notes, customer interaction assessments, and anything else you feel is missing." "You want my opinions?" she asked. "I want your truth," he said. "Most people tell me what I want to hear. You didn't. That's why you're here." Emily flipped through the folder. The pay was more than she'd made in the last 4 months combined. The benefits were temporary but decent. The contract didn't ask for exclusivity, just discretion, no strings at least, none that she could see. Still, she hesitated. "Why me?" "Really," she asked. "You could hire professionals, consultants, chefs with credentials." "I have," he said simply. "But none of them look at a restaurant and see the customer who counts quarters before ordering. None of them notice the waitress with a tired smile or the broken edge of a booth cushion." He leaned forward slightly. "You do. That's what I want." Emily looked up at him, unsure if she believed him, unsure if he believed himself. Then again, wasn't that what made this whole thing feel real? It didn't come gift-wrapped. It came with uncertainty. And for the first time in years, Emily was starting to believe uncertainty might be better than exhaustion. She placed the folder back on the table. "All right," she said. Thomas blinked. "All right, I'll give it 3 months. Nothing more. And if this turns into something else, anything dishonest, exploitative, or performative, I'm gone." He nodded slowly. "Fair." Later that day, Clive gave her a badge and a welcome packet. No tour, no fanfare, just a schedule. Her first assignment, shadow the customer experience team at a flagship location in the city. Emily left the building just after noon. The wind was sharp and unfriendly, the kind that slipped through your sleeves and reminded you it was still winter. She didn't mind, because she wasn't walking back into a diner. She was walking into something new. She didn't know yet if it was right, but it was forward, and for now, that was enough. The first few days were a blur. Emily Reeves moved through them like someone navigating a dream that wasn't hers. Corporate buildings, sleek uniforms, handshakes too firm and smiles too polite. She shadowed meetings, watched staff training sessions, and took pages of handwritten notes no one asked for, not because she had to, but because that's how she made sense of it all. Every room she entered, people looked up, then looked again, and not because they recognized her, because they didn't. Who is she? Why is she here? What does she know that we don't? She could feel it in their tone. In the pause when she spoke, in the way they introduced themselves with full resumes, laced into every greeting. She didn't answer the unspoken questions. She just observed. listened, and remembered. One night, after a particularly long orientation shift at one of the city pilot locations, Emily lingered alone in the back hallway near the staff lockers. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly. She leaned against the wall, arms folded, breathing deep. That was when she heard the voice, low, familiar. Emily Reeves. She turned. At the end of the hall stood Evan Whitmore. It had been almost 12 years. He wore a navy sport coat now, dress shoes, hair a little thinner, but still carefully styled. He looked like the kind of man who smiled in profile photos and had a LinkedIn that read like a brochure. "Evan," she said flatly. He approached, hands in his pockets. "I thought it was you. When your name came up on the team roster, I couldn't believe it." "I almost didn't believe it either," she replied. They stood in the stale hallway air, memories between them too old to be warm and too raw to be forgotten. "You look the same," he said. "I don't feel the same." He chuckled awkwardly. "That's fair. They'd dated briefly, in high school. Then again, briefly, during community college before he left Fallow Creek for bigger things. Their end hadn't been messy, just one of those silences that never got filled. Now, apparently, he was the brand director for the restaurant initiative Thomas had launched. "You're working with Granger now?" he asked. "For now," she said. 3-month trial." He nodded. "I've been on this project since day one. I figured," she said. "It's got your polish all over it." He raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment?" "Depends on the day." There was a beat. "You look tired," he said gently. "I am." He paused. "Listen, I'm glad you're here, but just be careful." "Okay." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful of what?" "Of expectations," he replied. "Of how fast things move here, and how fast they turn." She heard the warning beneath the words. Not mean, not cruel, but not entirely kind either. She straightened her spine. "Thanks. But I've handled worse than corporate egos and espresso machines." Evan smiled faintly. "That's the Emily I remember. That night, back at her apartment. She sat at the tiny kitchen table staring at her notes. Page after page of observations, layout inefficiencies, staff exhaustion, the fake cheer and corporate messaging. She knew this world was built on image. But her world, it had always been built on survival. She pulled out a photo from the drawer, one of her and her father, covered in flour in the tiny kitchen of their old house. He'd wanted to open a diner of his own, never did. A heart attack took him when Emily was just 16. Back then, she used to think life had stolen something from her. Now she wondered if it had only delayed it. At work the next day, things shifted again. Her feedback was included in a team memo, but edited, sanitized, stripped of anything real. She had flagged poor signage that confused customers, but in the memo, it was called Guest Exploration Pathways. She'd commented on overworked servers, now reframed as lean labor optimization. She felt a flicker of anger. Someone had rewritten her words to fit a narrative. She printed both versions and brought them to Clive Patterson. He listened calmly, scanned the pages. "You're right," he said. "This version doesn't reflect your voice." "Then why send it out?" Clive looked her squarely in the eye. "Because sometimes the truth comes second to the message." Emily's jaw clenched. "Not for me," she said quietly. He gave a faint nod. "That's why you're here." But the damage was done. She knew now not everyone in that building wanted her perspective. Some wanted her to be decorative honesty. But Emily Reeves didn't know how to fake it. She never had, and she wasn't about to start now. By the end of her 3rd week in the project, Emily Reeves felt the cracks forming. The meetings were faster, the decisions colder. What had started as observational consulting quickly turned into a game of translation. Her raw, honest feedback edited into corporate gloss. What she called rushed service. They called high turnover efficiency. What she called emotional burnout. They labeled team optimization fatigue. It wasn't just the words. It was the truth beneath them being rewritten. And Emily wasn't sure how long she could keep watching it happen. It didn't help that the tension with Evan Whitmore had thickened. He rarely spoke to her now, unless it was in front of others. And when he did, It was all curated charm, great input. We'll circle back. Love the passion. Every sentence felt like a dismissal wrapped in professional wrapping paper. She caught him once in a hallway, voice low, clearly irritated with someone on a call. She's a wild card, he said. I know she means well, but this isn't a community center, it's a brand. She didn't confront him, not yet, because something bigger had just hit. That night, the nursing home called. Her mother, Mary Reeves, had suffered a fall. Not serious, they assured her. No fractures, but she's disoriented and frightened. Emily didn't wait. She drove through the rain, past midnight streets, heart pounding the whole way. When she arrived, Mary was lying in bed, a bruise forming near her temple, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Emily sat beside her, brushing her hair gently back, whispering, "It's okay. I'm here now." Mary looked at her like through a fog. "Did I leave the stove on note for her, Mama?" Emily whispered. "Everything's fine. Just rest." But nothing felt fine. And that night, as the sky began to pale toward morning, Emily sat slumped in the hallway chair outside room 204, her coat draped over her knees, a styrofoam cup of stale coffee in her hand. She didn't go to work the next day. She called Clive instead. His voice was calm, as always. "Take whatever time you need. I'll let Mr. Granger know." "No need," she replied flatly. "He probably won't notice." There was a pause. "Actually," Clive said, "he already asked about you." Emily didn't know what surprised her more, that Thomas noticed, or that she cared. Still, she couldn't bring herself to go back. Not yet. Instead, she stayed home, sat on her porch, watched the neighborhood kids ride rusty bikes, paid overdue bills with the temporary project paycheck that now felt like hush money. She thought about walking away, more than once. 3 days later, a car pulled up in front of her house. Not flashy. A charcoal gray hybrid. Clive stepped out, briefcase in hand. Emily met him at the door, arms crossed. "Did someone send you to check on me?" she asked. "Not exactly," he replied, "but I do have something to deliver." He handed her a thin envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten, firm, clean strokes. "I'm not blind to what's happening, and I'm not proud of how slow I've been to intervene. But I see your value. I need your honesty, and I'm willing to adjust the terms of this partnership if it keeps you in the room. Thomas." Under the note was a document, a revision of her role. New title: guest experience strategist. Independent reporting line, direct input to Thomas, and a choice: continue or walk away, no penalty. Emily stood on her porch long after Clive left. The sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in streaks of orange and regret. She held the note in her hand, read it again, and whispered, "Don't say things you won't back up." But she didn't tear it up, and she didn't throw it away. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table folding laundry, her phone buzzed, a text from Clive. "If you return, Thomas has asked to meet you privately. No boardrooms, no agenda, just coffee." Emily stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Tell him to bring the real version of himself. I'll bring the real version of me." The coffee shop Thomas chose wasn't flashy. It was small, tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore, with chipped tables and mismatched mugs, a place where no one talked about margins or branding or performance metrics. Emily Reeves arrived 5 minutes early and found him already seated by the window, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. She paused at the door for a beat, watching him not as a boss or a businessman, but as a man. He looked still, not waiting, not impatient, just present. She walked in. "Morning," she said, sitting down. "Thanks for coming." He replied, "I came because I don't like loose ends." He nodded, accepting that. A server came by and Emily ordered plain black coffee, no frills. They sat in silence until their drinks arrived. Then, without ceremony, Thomas spoke. "You were right about everything." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Be more specific." "I'm right about a lot." He smiled, tired, but real. "You were right about the edits, the language, the way the truth gets polished until it stops being true." She sipped her coffee. And you let it happen. I did, he said, because I've built a life around control, around shaping narratives, so I didn't have to sit in the mess. He looked at her, eyes steady. You make me sit in the mess. There was a long pause, not uncomfortable, just honest. Emily leaned back in her chair. So, what now? You going to change the whole company because a waitress told you your eggs were dry? He chuckled softly. Maybe not the whole company, but maybe how I lead it. She looked at him, curious despite herself. Why do you even care what I think? He didn't answer right away. Then, he said, because you remind me of someone I used to be scared of becoming. Emily blinked. What does that mean? My mother, he said, single mom, raised me while working night shifts at a hospital. She was quiet, but fierce. Never asked for help, never waited to be rescued. He paused. I spent my whole life trying to become the opposite, powerful, respected, above struggle, and somewhere along the way, I started looking down on the kind of person she was. Emily looked at him, eyes softer now. She sounds a lot like mine. He nodded. I think she would have liked you. They sat for a while, sipping coffee, letting old wounds air gently in the sunlight. Then Emily asked, What do you want from me? Thomas, honestly, not the polished version. He met her eyes. I want your perspective, not watered down, not reframed. I want you to keep telling me the parts people are too afraid to say. She hesitated. And if I say something that threatens your plans, then maybe my plans need to be threatened. That caught her off guard. She looked out the window. Across the street, a man in a hoodie was helping an elderly woman load groceries into a cab, a small kindness, unnoticed by most. She turned back to him. All right, she said. We'll try this again. But no middlemen, no edits. You want my input, you get all of it, even the messy parts. Thomas extended a hand. Deal. She didn't shake it right away. Instead, she asked quietly, Do you know what it's like to be invisible for years and then suddenly be seen, but only for what people can use you for? He lowered his hand. I think I'm starting to... She nodded. Then shook his hand. Firm, steady. No transaction, just truth. On her way out of the cafe, she paused by the counter and left a tip for the server. The same small gesture she used to see dismissed every day at the Red Oak Diner. As she stepped into the morning light, her phone buzzed. A message from Clive: new role update, approved. You'll report directly to Thomas starting Monday. Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket and smiled faintly to herself. This wasn't about moving up. It was about moving true. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like her feet were on solid ground. Emily Reeves stepped into the new week like a woman stepping onto unfamiliar terrain, but this time, the ground didn't feel so uncertain. She wasn't reporting to some layered hierarchy anymore. She was reporting directly to Thomas Granger. Her name was now on the weekly briefing document. Her insights were no longer paraphrased by others. And most importantly, her presence wasn't questioned aloud, though she could still feel the whispers behind the glass walls. Not all resentment is loud. Some of it dresses itself in smiles and waits for you to stumble. At the morning strategy session, Emily sat at the far end of the table. Thomas was at the head, Clive beside him, Evan across from her. She noticed Evan didn't meet her gaze once. That was new. As the meeting progressed, Emily listened, took notes, and waited. When the topic shifted to customer experience trials for the new location downtown, she raised her hand slightly. I visited the site last night. She said, the table layout near the entrance creates a bottleneck during dinner rush. It's subtle, but it builds tension fast, especially for solo diners or older guests. A few heads turned. A junior designer scribbled a note. Thomas nodded, noted. Fix it, he said. Then he looked at her. Anything else? Emily hesitated, then added, also, the servers aren't being trained to de-escalate tense moments. They're told to smile through it, which might work in theory, but people see through that, and they remember how they were made to feel. It landed heavy in the room, not confrontational, just true. After the meeting, as people filed out, Evan finally approached. "You've certainly found your voice," he said. "Voice cool." Emily met his eyes. "No, I've always had it. People just stopped trying to ignore it." He gave a half smile. "Careful. Clarity and arrogance sometimes walk the same line." She didn't flinch, so do silence and cowardice. That stopped him. He turned away, but not before she saw it, the flicker of something that wasn't irritation. It was fear. Later that afternoon, Clive pulled her aside in the break lounge. "There's some discomfort among the legacy team," he said delicately, "specifically with your authority on experience design." "I'm not taking over their jobs," she said. "I know," Clive replied, "but to them, you weren't meant to have a seat at this table. You didn't climb their ladder. You arrived." Emily nodded slowly. "People like me don't get invited up. We get used as examples or warnings." Clive didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a file. "This is what your presence is disrupting. Every page of this is a system that has worked until now. Now it's shifting. That's uncomfortable." She looked down at the file. Budgets, messaging plans, event strategies. Then, something else, a feedback memo from Evan. She scanned it, her chest tightening. Emily's insights are rooted in anecdotal intensity, not operational scalability. Her perspective may be sincere, but it lacks the long-view nuance we need at this stage of brand development. Her hands gripped the paper. Clive saw her reaction. "Thomas hasn't seen this yet. I wanted you to." Emily folded the paper calmly, but her voice was razor-sharp. "So he's not just threatened, he's lobbying." That night, Emily drove back to Fallow Creek, not because she was running away, but because she needed air that didn't smell like filtered ambition. She brought a milkshake for her mother and sat with her by the window. Mary was lucid again, rare, but real. "You look tired," Mary said gently. "I am." Mary smiled. "Good. That means you're doing something that matters." Emily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I'm trying, Mama, but they don't want me there. Not really." Mary's voice softened, almost dreamlike. "They don't have to want you. They just have to hear you." As Emily drove back into the city under a bruised purple sky, she whispered to herself, "I won't shrink. Not now. Not again." Let them whisper. She was done asking for permission. The internal meeting was supposed to be just another status update. Emily Reeves came prepared with notes, data, and 3 first-hand testimonials from customers who had walked out of the flagship store due to the impersonal service design. She wasn't angry, she was exact. But the room was different today. Colder. Evan Whitmore sat with his arms folded. Others glanced at one another more than they looked at her. The air smelled like anticipation, the kind before a storm, not applause. Thomas Granger was running late, and Emily knew they weren't waiting to discuss, they were waiting to challenge. When the meeting finally started, it began civilly, until it didn't. Evan cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to raise a concern. It's been brought to my attention that recent changes in direction have created confusion in our brand identity." Emily didn't respond right away. He continued. "Specifically, the shift toward anecdotal-based revisions over tested user modeling. I believe we're at risk of pivoting too far, too fast away from our core strategy," someone added. "There's been a noticeable dip in team cohesion," another chimed in, "and guests are reacting inconsistently to the messaging shift." Emily stayed calm. "Are we here to share concerns, or stage a polite coup?" The room stiffened. Evan looked at her, eyes sharp. "We're here because decisions have consequences, and so far, your influence hasn't proven measurable." Just then, the door opened. Thomas stepped in. The room fell silent. He took a seat at the head of the table and looked around. "Should I be worried about the temperature in here?" Evan didn't wait. "With respect, Thomas, we need to talk about structure, about roles, about what is and isn't scalable." Emily placed her notes down slowly. "I'd like to respond." Thomas nodded. She stood. Not to grandstand, but to be eye level with every person in that room. I was brought in to offer what this team lacked: a lens from the ground up. And what I've seen, it's not a brand problem, it's an empathy problem. She pointed to the reports. These aren't stories, they're truths. If that threatens your model, maybe your model was never built to include people like me or the people we say we serve. She paused, looked directly at Evan. And if discomfort is the cost of honesty, I'll pay it. The room was dead silent. Then Thomas spoke. Quiet. Clear. She's right. Evan's jaw tightened. So we abandon process for passion? No, Thomas replied. We restore balance, because process without people is just noise. He turned to Emily. Your seat here is not temporary, and from this moment forward, your input will carry decision-making weight. There it was, a line drawn, and a reaction that followed. Evan stood, quietly collected his notes, and left the room. Others shifted. The room changed again, not fully in her favor, but no longer against her. Just reckoning. Later that evening, Thomas found Emily by the coffee machine. I'm sorry you had to stand alone in there, he said. She shook her head. I didn't stand alone. You showed up. He handed her a folder. Here's the rollout plan. I want you to lead the Human Experience Sub-Initiative. Full authority, budget included. Emily took the folder, eyes scanning the pages. It was real. So were the names, the approvals, the trust. That night, she returned to Fallow Creek again, not to escape, but to share the news. Her mother was dozing in the recliner, soft music playing in the background. Emily sat beside her, whispering, They tried to push me out, Mama, but I stayed. Mary stirred, barely awake. That's my girl. As she drove back into the city, the town lights in her rear view, Emily whispered to herself, Not everything that breaks is broken. And she smiled, because now she knew what it meant to bend without losing herself. 3 months later, the flagship location reopened, but it didn't look like a launch event. It looked like a story. Old wood booths reclaimed from a diner 2 towns over. Handwritten menus framed beside the register. A board by the door reading, This place was built with stories, not statistics. And in the center of it all, behind the open kitchen window, laughing quietly with a first-day server, was Emily Reeves. Not in a power suit, not holding a clipboard, just present, just real. The soft launch didn't have a press release, no cameras, no influencers. Instead, it had old couples holding hands, teenagers on first dates, a mechanic who came in still smelling like oil and ordered the grilled cheese that tastes like 1997. It worked not because it was flawless, but because it felt familiar, human, honest, exactly what she fought for. Thomas Granger arrived just before closing, dressed casually. He didn't announce himself, just ordered coffee and sat at the corner booth. Emily joined him. He raised his cup to something better. She clinked her mug softly against his. I'm not sure what this is yet, she admitted, but it feels like the start of something, right? He nodded. It's your name on the back of the menu now. You know, I noticed, she said. Didn't cry, but I almost did. They smiled. Then Thomas reached into his jacket and placed something on the table, a new black card. I had it redone, he said. Not a gift, a partnership. For future projects, whenever you're ready. Emily didn't take it right away. She just looked at it, then looked at him, and said, I'll think about it, because power was never in the card. It was in the choice. Later that night, she drove to Fallow Creek one last time. Her mother was sleeping, peaceful and light. Emily placed a framed photo on the bedside table, her and Mary, in the new restaurant, arms wrapped around each other, both smiling. She whispered, You helped build this, even if you don't remember. Then she sat down beside the window, just breathing. Outside. A quiet snow began to fall, covering the streets, the rooftops, the past. And inside, Emily Reeves finally felt like she had come home, not to a place, but to herself. Sometimes, The loudest kind of courage is choosing to stay soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you. Emily didn't just speak up that day in the diner. She reminded us that dignity doesn't come with a price tag, and that every person, no matter how invisible the world may make them feel, deserves to be seen, fully. Her journey wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rising to power. It was about reclaiming her voice and using it not to shout, but to build something better. And yet, her story also holds up a mirror to us all. How many times have we looked right through someone just because they didn't fit the suit, the title, the image? How often have we let quiet kindness be mistaken for weakness? This isn't just Emily's story. It's a wake-up call to look again, deeper this time, to ask not what someone is, but who they are. If this story moved you even a little, let it linger. And if you believe the world needs more stories that heal, challenge, and connect us, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice helps amplify others. And who knows? The next story might just be your own.